This is the presentation on downtown revitalization. I'll say right up front, not much has changed from last year. So those of you who are veterans of this program and this presentation, you'll be familiar with most of the information that we have and most of the pictures and everything else. So, but I should also say for those of you who are new, there's a lot of information here, and if you haven't heard it before, then you may want to follow up with me on some specific questions or specific situations afterwards. Okay, so an overview. Of course, DTR is awarded on an annual basis. The allocation this year is more than last year. We went from 2.4 million to 3.7. And that goes in line with an increased maximum request, which was $500,000, now going to $650,000. And that is because, as we all know, the costs have gone significantly higher in construction, especially seems like in this type of area where you're doing rehabilitation on older buildings. We've funded on average about 5 to 6 projects a year. I think we're up to like 69 projects now since we started in 2009. And then through Sarah's CDBG CV program, we had 19 additional DTR projects. Obviously, the projects must meet a national objective of CDBG, and in this case, it's the elimination of slum and blight. Low moderate income's not a factor for DTR. Ideally, we love to see, and everybody does, the nice before and after photos with highly visible outcomes, but slum and blight has to be the #1 priority, even if you can't really see it all that well from the street. And remember, as always, buildings with first floor residential are not eligible. Upper story residential is fine. First floor is not. Okay, so here's some photos from around the state. I did find a few new ones. I think these are nice examples of a transformation that's easily visible and impactful. Okay, so our application cycle, the window opens or should open today or within a day or two. Deadline for submittal is November 1st, 2022. And as before, you need 8 buildings or addresses, actually is a better way to describe it, for the maximum award, which is now $650,000, and 6 for an award of anything less than $650,000. If you are submitting a iconic building application, there is obviously no minimum number of buildings because it's likely to be only one building. Maybe 2. So there's no number. And as always, there is no additional non-grant construction allowed on a project buildings from the date of submittal until the end of project contract. I know that's very troublesome for business owners, and I fully understand that. We have tried talking with HUD, and actually it's more Department of Labor in this case than it is HUD. And we cannot get that changed. They won't even bend. But there are a few exceptions that I talk about later in the slide that kind of alleviates that sting a little bit. Only fronts and readily visible sides facades qualify automatically. Rear facades can possibly work, but only those having direct street frontage or complete view from an adjacent street, and that is fairly rare. You also need rear facades to qualify, also need to have entrances from the street directly into the business, not just to an upstairs apartment, but into the actual ground floor business itself. And I guess this is new. You cannot, we've now made the rule that you cannot receive funding for a new DTR if you have an open DTR grant at the time of award. So until it's, if you've got a DTR now, until it's closed out, we will not fund a new award. And that does not include the COVID grants that involved facades, though. It's the regular program DTRs. All right. So we just, I think this was from last year we introduced this, but it bears repeating. Target areas from previously funded DTR applications can be reused, but the target area as a whole must still meet 25% minimum slum and blight percentage. And buildings that previously received funding can most often not be the receipt of funds a second time, although there are some exceptions. But if you have one of those, just call us and we'll talk it through. And a building previously funded cannot be counted as blighted towards 25% a second time. But again, there are some exceptions possible. Target areas do not have to be contiguous. We get that question quite a bit, and ideally, I still feel like they should be, but they do not have to be. But it should be basically rectangular in shape and must still be fully within a community's core downtown area. But if you do need to break it up, and there's logical reasons for doing that, it will not hurt your score if there's a logical reason to have separate areas. It's more important they be in the downtown area and that they not have arms like an octopus reaching out in all directions. We want to keep it kind of a logical grid shape as much as we can. All right, and we used to have, as those of you who are more been through this before, funding limits based on population. We did away with that. It doesn't matter how small the community is. If they have enough buildings, they can still ask for the maximum amount. All right, the roof component. It has to represent one element of several blighted items. It can't just be that the building needs a new roof and nothing else. So we're saying you need 2 or 3 other blighted elements. For instance, say you've got a roof, but you also have bad upper story windows, you got deteriorated front door, you have masonry work, that will be eligible. Blighted roof conditions must be described and documented and photographed as best you can. We don't expect people to hop from roof to roof in a downtown to get photographs, but document as best you can, and in reasonably the same manner as all other building elements contributing to slum and blight. And then work related to the roof cannot exceed 40% of the total construction costs of all facades covered by said roof. And I say that because one roof may cover the exteriors of more than one facade, be it a front and side of a single structure or a roof spread over several adjacent storefronts. So again, to clarify, because I do get questions on this, if you have, for instance, 101, 103, 105 Main, but it's one roof that covers all 3 of those storefronts, but they are separate businesses and separate addresses, You can combine the cost of those 3 facades and take your 40% for the roof out of that. Okay, so iconic buildings. We don't do very many of these, but actually, I would like to see us do some more, because I believe it can be, if it's truly iconic building, can be impactful as doing 8 others. It's kind of a know it when you see it type of thing in a way, but the building, an iconic building should have these characteristics. So needs to be larger in size and height, footprint in comparison to all or nearly all other buildings in the downtown. It needs to be vacant or with clear underutilization of the space, or used for something that's way beyond its best use, put it that way. Highly visible from a number of directions, generally considered or accepted as a local landmark, displaying distinct historical, cultural, or architectural features, strong importance to the overall downtown redevelopment efforts. So need to meet probably all of those, or the vast majority at least, to qualify for iconic. And it's unlikely that any one non-entitlement size city would have more than 1 or 2 of these buildings, because they wouldn't be so iconic if there were that many of them. All right, developing a project. Applicants need to work with architects from early on. You should procure architects in advance of an award, but do not sign the final design construction contract until the project is awarded funding. So in essence, you can find an architect, agree that they're going to be the firm you use all the way through, but do not sign and formally commit to post-award work until you have the funds, because if you do sign before that, it will knock it out of grant eligibility. You need to have some evaluation criteria to pick the best candidate for an architect. Again, procurement regulations, it's best to solicit all phases at once, because then that person is locked in, as I just described. And as you know, application preparation is a pre-award cost that cannot be reimbursed. So anything you use the architect for preparing the application cannot be part of the grant reimbursement if you're funded. Property owners should be given realistic expectations of all things connected with this, the cost, the time frame being the 2 biggest ones, and the restrictions. Commitment letters from property owners should be included in your application, or will have to be included in your application. But remember, that's not a legal binding obligation. They can and do often change their mind later on and drop out. It's just, but it's a good way of us and the applicant to know about how many people are interested and how many buildings they will end up with. But oftentimes you will have a couple drop out and a couple join in their stead, or that kind of thing. It's not unusual. And you can call on us at any time during the application process, specifically myself or Sarah Plowman will be the two chief reviewers, along with a few other folks, I guess. Okay. Then the good old Slum and Blight. So that building is clearly blighted. Fortunately, we don't see too awfully many of those, but they exist just about everywhere. But more of what we are working on are buildings of this type that are what I call light blight, where you have to look a little bit, you got to get in a little bit close to see that it needs some repair work done to it. And that's fine as long as it does need those repairs. It doesn't have to look like the previous slide, but it obviously can't be in perfect shape either. So, all right. So how do you attack this slum and blight objective? You pick your target area, and remember, it still needs to be in the core downtown. 25% or more of the buildings in entire target area, however you decide to define it, must be in fair to poor condition. That's not that hard to meet because fair condition is kind of like the slide we had before where you got to look fairly close to find the things. Um, so, and then step 3, the designated area must meet the requirements of Iowa Code Chapter 403, which is the urban renewal area statute. And you need a resolution adopted by the city within 2 years of the application, designating the area that your target area is in as being blighted or an economic development area. Or your target area may be part of an already existing urban renewal area. And that's fine as well. But please give us a map that shows us where it is, shows us the entire designated urban renewal area, and then show us where your target neighborhood is within that. Because some of those old resolutions and maps are really hard to read, and legal descriptions are an extreme pain to try and trace those. So help us out there. Okay. Again, in most cases, we're talking blight light. So you need to identify and describe deteriorating building components and provide photos by element. By element, we need doors, windows, storefront, roof, masonry, etc. CDBG funds can only be used for buildings properly classified as in fair or poor condition. So I have had a few applications where a building was classified as like good or excellent, and then it was shown as a project building. And obviously you can't. I mean, it's got to be fair or poor, and you have to show that. So 4 main components again: select your area, do a basic inventory form, slum and blight inventory form for all buildings in the area. For those buildings that you expect to or hope to provide funding to, there we need a detailed slum and blight form. And because for buildings not in the project area, you will not have to go through and detail all of the elements. You can just make a judgment call without doing that. But for project buildings, you do have to go into the detail. And then I'd already talked about the resolution. And again, please attach a map that we can follow and read. All right, so the slum and blight inventory form is part of the application. Again, for every building in the target area, we need a general individual building description to say if it's good or bad or fair or excellent. And most of the time, and if not, we will ask you for an additional picture, but it rarely happens. Most of the time, just give us a front facade picture with your overall rating, and you're good. We may not, when we evaluate it, we may not agree 100, well, I don't think we ever agree 100% with your overall percentage, but as long as it's over 25% and not wildly different than what we come up with, it's not an issue. But for the project funded buildings, you'll also need to provide building element descriptions and pictures. And there again, are the types of elements: storefront, doors, windows, stairs, foundation, roof, and rank those items in order of how much work is needed. So the number one would be your top priority because it is in the worst condition. Number five would be in the uh, best condition. And maybe you don't even address number five in your final scope of work. You may not need the work, or financial constraints are going to tell you that you can't get to all five. So you want to do the top priority items, and you want to do a majority of the items as well. But we do not expect you to be able to do them all. Okay, so again, have a priority ranking for each blighted element. Provide descriptions, clear photographs of deteriorating conditions for each of those elements. And as I always say, you know, get in close, get some good photos that actually show what you're talking about as being a blighting factor. Make sure to propose improvements to the areas of the buildings that you have ranked worst, and address the worst elements first. Um, so here what we're saying is, if you say the masonry is in horrible shape and brick is crumbling and mortar's missing, and that, you know, we might have things tumbling down and hitting somebody on the sidewalk, and then you don't put that in your work description, well, then your impact score is going to be really bad, because if you are citing something as needing work, then address it. So again, no first floor residential usage in the buildings, on ineligible buildings. And as I said, you often can't get to all bad elements or all bad buildings, but need to get clear majority of both. So on all bad buildings, everyone, or probably everyone that applies for this program, has buildings that may be some of the very worst in the entire community, but they are owned by, for lack of a better word, slumlord, or and maybe I should say an absentee owner perhaps, or somebody that just doesn't get along with the city, or whoever. And so they're not going to participate, or maybe they don't have any funds to put towards it. So yes, we realize that some blighted buildings just aren't going to be in the program, but we need to see that most of them that are in the target area do get addressed. We've had a few applications where there were as many bad buildings out of the program as there were in, and that's not going to get you enough impact points. But you understand you can't get every single one you would like. All right, so we've got some samples of photographs. These are for front facade. This would particularly be appropriate for the buildings not in your project, because they're not particularly close in, but they do show the full facade, and those buildings are in good shape. And here's some bad pictures where primarily because, well, one is taken at a kind of a sharp angle, the other doesn't show anything but the front entrance. So we want to see in any front facade, whether it's a project building or not, we want to see the entirety of the facade. Storefronts. These pictures are pretty good. I might have been able to find a better one than for the American Food Market there. Should have replaced that one maybe, but it does show, since it's a small storefront, it does show the entirety of it. And then the one on the left is actually from one of Sarah's COVID grants. Again, it shows the storefront area. And here are some from foundations, where you can clearly see you got some problems going on there. Probably got some critters living under those walls. but very, very evident, in close and evident. Pictures of windows here. So again, I think on the one on the left, obviously the window sill is a humongous issue. The one on the right, there's no window at all. It's all just been particle boarded over. You can see some deterioration on the eyebrow of the building and the ledge. So, you know, tells us that there is work needed to be done. And these are for the exterior wall or masonry. So, very evident again. The one on the right must have to assume that was stucco, but it's cracking and disappearing. And the one on the left, you can see well, you can see the issues. All right, so written description examples. So this is the type of language we're looking for. Now, again, I say this every year, but these descriptions are not all from one building. These are actual narratives that I like combined into one just to show you different examples. But I think it paints a real picture of what's going on. Same thing with the windows. So what we're trying to avoid, again, as I say every year, what we're trying to avoid is somebody saying, well, the wall, the mortar's bad, the windows are old and junky. You know, we need a little more detail than that kind of a description. All right, so how we score these. So here's what, in going through these every year, here's the most common, well, I call it failings. It's kind of like, maybe that's not the right word, but things that will cost you points in a competitive application. So one, you don't have all the required attachments, or they're not properly prepared and executed, uploaded. The application is hard to read, not consistent, not clear, not logically organized. Public hearing, be careful on that public hearing. It can possibly disqualify you, but a public hearing that isn't properly noticed in the paper and with the right dates, or the minutes don't cover the points that I think Dan Arbor was talking about this morning, that you have to include. You can't just say we opened the meeting, nobody was there, the mayor called it good, and we closed it. No, you've got, somebody still has to cover those points, and who's ever taken the minutes has to list them, because HUD has told us in their famous quote that if it isn't in writing, it didn't happen. So that's what we have to go by. Inadequate photographs or fuzzy descriptions of blighting factors, or fuzzy description of the elements on the project buildings as a whole, sometimes including no prioritization of blighted elements. So we do need to see you rank them. You're not going to be held to that as well. You said this was number one, so yeah, you can't ever say it's 2 or 3. No, but we need to know what, at least at the time, what you think the worst elements were. Here's one: lack of consistency of project budget numbers throughout the application. We changed the application again so that it should make it easier, because there aren't as many places where you can enter those numbers. But the architect's numbers and your numbers in the budget, or the numbers that you get if you look at the property owner's pledge, they should all jive in the end. So double check those. And if there is a difference, there may be, for instance, where when the property owner submitted his letter, maybe the cost wasn't the same as what the final architect finding was. So just say that. Give us a note somewhere that says, they're a little bit different. That's because the letter was signed before the final dollar amount was reached, or estimated dollar amount. All right, here's another one: non-descriptive or incomplete architect renderings on our work write-ups for each proposed building in terms of identified blighting elements. So identify blighting elements, but the architect doesn't show in his renderings what's going to happen to it, or the architect's work write-up doesn't talk about it, or doesn't talk about it enough so that we know what's going to be done to remedy the blight. Amount and level of commitment of local matching funds not demonstrated or not firmly committed. And owner pledge letter is not covering all the vital points. And there is a sample pledge letter, template pledge letter that we have. I'm not 100% sure without looking if it's on our website. I think it is. If not, I can find it and send it to anybody that wants it. All right, so scoring methods. Okay, so iconic building applications are a little bit different because there is no ratio of total number of buildings served per target area. So they get impact category scores in terms of coverage of in the target area based on the average of all other applicants. Okay. Plus, we have bonus points for cities of under 10,000 population, 1 point, or under 5,000 population, 1.5 points. And that is because an iconic building in a smaller community of 10,000 or 5,000 or less is going to have a bigger impact than if it's in a city of 25 or 30 or 40,000. And again, each criteria is similar to, I think we try to be consistent with that, similar to other programs, as a 1 to 5 scale. In this case, there's a maximum of 45 points for the ever elusive perfect application. Application scoring less than and this will depend from year to year, but if you don't get about 28 points, you're probably going to be out of the cutoff for being funded. Okay, and then applications are evaluated by, well, we'll see how it all works out with our staffing, but ideally 4 persons, and then all the scores are averaged. All right, so there are the criteria, and if you read these, they're a little bit nebulous, but I mean, we know what what they all mean, and I guess to highlight some of these, the third point down there, leveraging. It turns out how the scoring falls that a local match of 36 to 45% is likely required to be competitive for funding. Okay. So if you get 50% or more, well, good for you. I mean, then you're going to get a higher score. But we found that if you drop below that 36% level, that unless you've just got an amazing, absolutely amazing application everywhere else, you might not be able to make that up. So that's what I tell people as a minimum to be competitive. All right, and then the fourth point, that's what I was talking about with the iconic buildings being different. Number of project facades divided into the total number of facades in the target area. And last year, actually, not this year, but last year, changed that score where it is actually not as big of a factor as it was. It's a lot wider range in order to get the same number of points. But all things being equal, a smaller target area is better than a larger one. you will get more impact, or you will get more points. It's just not as much of a difference as it once was. Okay. Um, Again, that the next point talked about that a couple slides back. And then the degree to which scale and scope is appropriate. Well, that's kind of just, if somebody came in and said they were going to do 30 buildings in 3 years, we would say, no, you won't make it. Community involvement, pretty obvious. I mean, you've got to have your normal support from the property owners and from involved organizations. Readiness to proceed, I think we know what that is. You get some bonus points if you got your draft environmental ready to go at the time of application, but you don't have to. And degree to which a project will impact the target area overall. That is not the same as the ratio of buildings. That is more of a how much of the worst slum and blights eliminated and how much visual impact will there be. Yeah, I think the only one, okay, the very top one, I skipped over that. Yeah, that's just, what it says. The application has to be put together where we can read it and make sense of it. The second point, degree to which proposed activity is appropriate for CDBG. That is another measure of how much slum and blight exists in your target area and how much is being addressed in comparison to all the other applicants. Okay, so communities that have more actual slum and blight and worse buildings, and you can understand why. I mean, they're going to be scored a little bit higher because they're simply because their need is a little higher. Okay, cost estimates. All right. Well, relative accuracy is vital to a project meeting its goal. If you're way off, and we've had way off to on probably maybe on both sides, but obviously more on not estimating enough, leads to all kinds of problems down the road. The average per facade building cost next year may be like 75 grand. Hard to tell. Some of the costs have come down a little bit, but it's going to be high. Architects should err on the high side, but don't get ridiculous about it because then we will look to, well, you just won't, again, you're going to lose some impact scores because of cost effectiveness. So, but we understand there are unknowns, and so the estimates should reflect that. And I repeat there, the funds can only be used for buildings properly classified in fair or poor conditions. So costs, unless it's a very tiny building, the cost should rarely be minimal. I mean, if you put a building in and you're going to say you only need $75,000, or I'm sorry, $7,500 to fix it up, we're going to think, well, how blighted can it be? Because $7,500 is really minimal nowadays. Don't forget about historic preservation standards and how they may increase the costs if the building's deemed to be contributing or is on a historic register list. Make sure the property owner is on board with final cost estimates, because again, you're going to avoid possible clashes later if they're unclear on what it's all going to cost. And then the unexpected or hidden costs, the most typical one of these is where you rip an old slipcover off the front of the building and find out that underneath it is just a total mess and you didn't realize that. So keep that in mind, that you might face change orders or contingencies. And because of that, we allow higher contingency on these than we would on let's say like a water and sewer project, because of um, the uncertainty of some of the work. But don't put in, a 30% contingency line item. That's getting a little too much. Um, 20, 25% maybe, something like that. But try to not get out of hand there with contingencies. All right, and then we've got the old lead-based paint. Remember, and I know this gets lost a lot of times in the shuffle with DTR because there's so many things going on, but if you have residential spaces upstairs, the same rules, same lead-based paint rules apply as for housing rehab, the old housing rehab programs. So you need to do testing and interim controls on any residential units for all areas in which painted surfaces will be disturbed, regardless of the cost. Okay. Does not apply to commercial portion of the structure, but does apply again with residential units that are either currently occupied or readily occupiable. Now, we do have a definition of what that means if you want. It's basically something that could be moved into in just a couple of days. That's livable, and it's got all the things you need for normal human habitation that are already there. It's got heat and cooling and water, plumbing, and structurally sound, and not infested with any kind of insects or rodents, not full of storage materials, that somebody could move in there quickly. All right, so as with the housing rehab, hard costs cannot exceed 24,999 unless for the residential units, each residential unit, unless building is determined historic. If you break that 24,999, full abatement's required. You don't want to go there. And so far, we've had a person or two get close, but nobody's gone over. If you think you're about to, call us. Of course, you won't know that until you actually do the project. 24,999 is considered per residential unit. So if you got 2 upstairs apartments, you could spend, $2 short of 50,000 and still be okay. Except it's acceptable to subtract out costs that are specifically for commercial improvements, but common spaces are supposed to be split 50-50. Yeah, so full abatement situation not likely to occur, but it's possible. And we do monitor for lead-based paint compliance. All right, historic preservation. Beware of your community's historical cultural assets, as well as any past surveys. They're good for 5 years. And any existing districts or local rehab guidelines, because if you do have some local rehabilitation guidelines, you'll need to follow those in the DTR work, of course. And we do encourage historic preservation practices. If you're funded, you'll need to survey and evaluate all project properties as part of your Tier 2 environmental review, or Section 106. And also keep in mind that the general release of funds letter on your environmental, if you're doing a Tier 2, in itself does not allow work on any project buildings. There's some other things you could do, but you can't touch the buildings with any construction work until you have cleared your 106. And any buildings deemed potentially eligible for National Register must be rehabbed in accordance with the Secretary of Interior standards. That's always been the case. So allow time for meeting those standards and for your 106 review in your overall project time frame. And you will need to do that before you bid. And then you can contact Robert of our staff for info and assistance with this process, and there's his email and phone number. The SHPO does not need to be involved. For a short time they were, but since Robert joined the staff in, I think like middle of May, it's come back to us. Okay, property owner's role, just so you know, going into it. Of course, these are all pre-award. So they need to, in their owner pledge letter, acknowledgement of the total cost estimate, their financial contribution, and again, a percentage of the total estimated cost is typically used, but you can put a not to exceed figure in there if that's acceptable to the city, and if that makes the property owner more at ease. It's not prohibited that you do that, as long as you meet your basic percentage, but then, you know, there's change orders and so on. Well, you can put a cap on the owner's participation, again, if the city is willing. The letter should acknowledge the applicability of federal requirements such as the historic review, prevailing wage is being paid, and no other construction work. Post-award easement agreement will be required. They need to know that. They need to understand slum and blight, not beautification, but slum and blight are the highest priority, not aesthetics. We can provide sample letters if need be, as I said, and that letter does not legally bind the owner. Okay, a few more tips here. Don't promise property owners inclusion until you know how much money you will have and have accessed all blight. Circulate commitment letter templates early on so people have a chance to look at those and think of those, and maybe take them to their attorney if they feel like they need to. Don't expect construction for this round until, well, at least spring of 23. Convey federal requirements. The city is running the ship, so they hire the architect and the contractor. Prevailing wage rates, historic preservation, and then the HUD mandate that no additional construction work to participating buildings from time of application through the end of the grant. And that's not, remember, that's not the end of the work on that building. That's the end of the entire grant. Now, that being said, routine maintenance work, we're not gonna try and throw federal regulations at that. Emergency repairs are exempted. We've had several of those. We've had a roof partially collapse. We've had a car go through a glass storefront. We've had a furnace blow up in the middle of January. All of those things are emergency repairs, and you do not have to worry about the federal mandates for those. The other thing I'll say is that we don't like to publicize this too widely, but if at the time the application is submitted, which is HUD's kickoff point, if you have building owners that have a contract that's already been entered into, or whatever you want to call a contract, an agreement, letter of engagement, whatever, and they're having work done, we're not going to say, hey, you started this work 2 months ago, you got 2 weeks to go, you have to stop for the next 3 years. No, you can go ahead, and property owners can go ahead and finish that work if it's already underway. Just don't expand it or start anything new. But for practical reasons, obviously, something's about is ongoing now and not quite finished when you submit the application, they can go ahead and finish it. Okay, so brings us to question and answer. Oh. Okay, we have any questions? Yeah. Oh, we do. Okay. Good deal. Starting to worry there for a second. Is it required that the slum and blight survey is, oh, I'm not starting at the top. Okay, Tom, do you still require a slum and blight district designation if there is just one iconic building that is proposed? No. Simple answer, no. Still has to be in the core downtown and the building itself has to be blighted, but you do not have to establish any kind of a actual target area or, well, oh, I'm sorry, I misread your question. It's not about target area. Do you still require a slum and blight district designation? Yes. Yes, it should still be in a area designated by the city as such. Okay, is it required that the slum and blight survey is completed by an architect? No, it is not, Liz. Some people will pay the architect to do that. Some communities have used like their building or code enforcement officials to do it. Or sometimes there's been a local contractor that helps the city or a cog out with doing it. Sometimes it's staff of the cog themselves. I've also seen like Historic Preservation Commission, local people that have good construction knowledge do it. Whoever has enough knowledge of the buildings and construction to know what's bad and be able to point it out works. Does not have to be an architect. Okay, Rose, for CDBG programs with 11/1 application deadline, can you please provide slides in the next day or two? Sure, sure. I can send those to you. Yes. Whoops, sorry. Does an existing DTR grant have to be fully closed out to receive a new DTR award? Yes. Yeah. But not COVID facades, but regular DTR grants, yes, they do. Okay, if an owner needs to make emergency repairs to a building component that isn't part of the project scope, can an exception be made to no other construction work? No. No, any work on the building after the application is submitted that wasn't started before then or isn't an emergency is a no-no unless you want to try and meet all the federal requirements. Okay, anybody else? No? Okay. Well, like I said, this program hasn't changed drastically like some of the other ones in the last few years. So those of you who are veterans of the process aren't going to see much different, except that there's a higher max now. All right. So if that's all everybody's got, we'll let you go. We're about out of time anyway. So thanks for your attention, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.